Share screen. So bear with me. Okay. That's Thank you. Do you all see this?
Yes.
The
Yes.
slide?
It's looking
Okay,
good.
great. So thanks for this opportunity to speak to you about this project that I love. It's very near and dear to my heart. The Malden Riverworks for waterfront equity and resilience. We started this journey in 2019. And the whole point was to bring together a coalition of basically BIPOC community leaders, some government stakeholders, and some environmental advocates to create a climate resilient waterfront park on the Malden River, which would give public access to all Malden residents. Up until that point, that was not the case. Um, yeah, there we go. There was not public access to the Malden River. Basically, it was all privately owned sites. So that was part of the problem. This is just another shot of some of the youth that have been participating in our project. So Malden is a gateway city, just a little bit of background information, and it has a really significant environmental justice population. The city's racial and ethnic diversity is often cited as a source of civic pride, but I know it has the most racially diverse high school in the Commonwealth. However, the city's racial and ethnic diversity is not always equitably represented in local leadership. And I constantly raise that issue because I think it definitely impacts, certainly, in my opinion, it can adversely affect participation and trust in local government. It's something we continue to advocate for. Access for all Malden residents means for many, in particular for residents of Malden's environmental justice communities, an opportunity to experience the Malden River for the very first time. Some of the activities that we have offered in this process is bringing people to the site where the park is going to be and offering free canoe rides and other activities. And people always turn up in great numbers for those kind of activities. This is just an overhead shot of the site. It's actually the DPW site, Department of Public Works. This is what we call a both-and model, where we're going to continue to have functional industrial area, while at the same time having a public park on the same lot. This isn't just another shot of the DPW. And in fact, it was chosen because it's the only lot on the river that is owned by the city, and such, the ability to transform it as a model for future equitable, resilient riverfront development for Malden and other communities. A key challenge of the project is constantly to increase equitable access to open space and prepare for climate change at the same time. This is what happens when it rains. And this is part of the very same yard. And as you can see, it has open salt piles, which is not good because when it rains, the salt is going into the river. We're going to change all that with this wonderful park that we're developing. And this is a shot of the river and the dock that currently is there. And the dock is shaky at best. And the new one that will be constructed will be anyone, regardless of your mobility, will be able to access the river itself. And right now, it's not ADA compliant, so it's difficult for folks in wheelchairs to be able to get down to the site. So this is just giving you some information on the three main goals of our project. We started with building the coalition among Malden's diverse communities. We established a steering committee of BIPOC leaders. It was also about creating a both-and model for development and also to address the needs for the DPW by preparing them for climate resilience as well. So these three goals provided, I think, a model framework for community-based resilience planning that helps ensure transparency between government and the citizens. Yeah. We were able to establish our governance structure, which consists of the Malden Riverworks Steering Committee. I'm the chairperson of that, and the Malden Riverworks project team. So we have these two teams basically that have been driving this project. The steering committee established core values, worked on raising funds and controlling funds, and the project team meets on a weekly basis and has handled day-to-day implementation of tasks. So we had a very extensive concept design process where we held numerous public meetings at the local senior center and got input. This was, I think, our very first meeting where we gave people posters and stickers and said, tell us what you want to see at the river, at the possibilities of this park. It was really, we've had some wonderful processes, engaging with communities, hearing from young people as well. A lot of people at the meeting were saying, oh, we didn't even know there was a river. It was like that. Or people would say that we always heard it was so dirty, you couldn't go near it, that kind of thing. We were told to stay away from the river. So we would informing people that in this process, we're going to change that narrative. These are some of the meetings that were held. They're not all of them there. I haven't updated this thing, but besides public meetings, we conducted surveys. We have bi-monthly steering committee meetings, weekly project team meetings since 2019. And we've had several community events. And in fact, our last event was this year in June, which is probably the last event we'll hold at the site before we go to construction. Part of our advocacy and also our outreach, we would hold meetings in people's backyards or say we're having a barbecue and come and learn about the river at the same time. We also partnered with many different organizations, Friends of the Malden River, Chinese Culture Connection, Greater Malden Asian Community Coalition, Arab Women's Association, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, Urban Media Arts, just as an example of some of the organizations that we have partnered with on this project and would call out when we were holding an event, telling people, networking with people to bring folks out and learn about the project and engage with it. This was our, I believe our first, yes, October 2019. This was our very first public meeting that we held, and we invited Alexi Torres, who is a community activist and organizer from the South Bronx in New York, and has a lot of over 25 years of experience in social justice leadership in low-income communities. And we brought her to our public meeting to motivate our communities and to hear from her so that people could see that others just like us have successfully done what we were attempting to do. And she reminded us that when the people lead, the leaders will follow. And that was a good mantra for us. This is an example. This is our final concept design. As you can see, we've moved some things around. We've moved our boathouse. We worked on the way the DPW would enter and exit this site. Did things like create, a salt shed so that the salt is no longer going into the river. As you can see, we have a lawn that will be accessible for people to have events on. And we'll be addressing issues of stormwater drain problems that exist currently at the DPW site. We went through 3 different concepts, designs, but this was the final one that was accepted. Also part of this process and project is, it says over 200 new trees going to be planted, bushes, very much addressing dealing with nature-based solutions for this project, which will definitely address the heat island issues that we have to deal with, as well as air quality and giving us the tree canopy. So we're very excited about all of this. One of the things to increase participation of communities, we always felt it is necessary to try to meet people in a setting that makes them relax and feel at home, and definitely offering free canoe rides brought out families, and it was wonderful. We also learned that community participation looks different during different phases of a project. And so I guess the nature of community engagement has to be adaptable. And we tried to do that. All of us have gone through the process of the COVID years. And so we had to change from public meetings to meetings online, things like that. But we had to work harder to keep people engaged and decentralize community meetings, go to people. Instead of always calling people to our meetings, we would ask different community organizations if we could come and present at their meetings, those kind of things, to keep people engaged in what was happening. Some of the lessons learned through this process. I think one of the most important things that we've learned is at the beginning of the project is really where you commit to an equitable process or not. I think it would be great to think that at the very beginning of your project relationship, there's an assumption of trust, but it's not always the case. The reality is sometimes that there's skepticism at best and sometimes downright mistrust, particularly between communities and municipalities at different times, and in some cases because of past experiences. So you have to work on the relationship. You have to work on building a trusting relationship. And the best way to do that is to be honest and show respect to each other. There'll be times when you disagree, but even within those times, it's an opportunity for growth. So I think it's important that you don't treat people as tokens, and that you respect people's time. If your target audiences are people are employed or community members or even students, you have to think about when you're holding your meetings. Holding meetings at 10 o'clock in the morning is not very conducive to bringing out community members. So you have to think about things like that. You have to think about, if you can't provide daycare, maybe provide some kind of activities for kids, so that if parents want to come out to the meeting, you have something for their kids to do, and so it doesn't become disruptive. Those are some of the things that we have done. As I said earlier, I think when people feel comfortable, they're at ease. The engagement flows so much easily. One thing we've also learned is language often becomes a means of excluding people. So maybe not intentionally, but if you don't make a way for those whose first language is not English, then you unintentionally exclude a large segment of your community. So you have to keep that in mind. And maybe it's more costly and it's more difficult, but you have to address it if you want your community members to feel a part of this and gain ownership of the project. I also just let me say, don't be fooled. Everything doesn't always go so smoothly, but you adapt, you review what didn't work, what did work, and you make changes as you go along. So I think that's some of the stuff we've been trying to do. And again, I'm just stressing that the relationship should be transformational and not transactional. And that's a very important part when you are engaging communities on an equitable basis. Here, I'm just showing you some of what our design processes and we are currently. We are going out contracting bids for construction are going out this month. They may have already gone actually. And once the a bid is secured and we've identified a contractor, construction we're hoping will begin the very latest, the spring of 2025. But we've succeeded in raising all the necessary money, which is amazing. And so that's why there is some pressure to get things to construction, because the longer you delay, then cost increase and things like that. We've had lots of help along the way, including, raising the money. We were short something like 3.5 million of what we needed, and just recently, Secretary Tepper found some money to fill that gap for us. And so, it was a tremendous, personally, I was brought to tears, just realizing that we really got to the point where this project is going to move to the process of going out to bid and construction, working, for the past 5 years, trying to raise this money and move the project on. So it's a great feeling. These are just some more photos of times we've spent on the water. This young man here is actually a family member of mine and from the Nipmuc Nation. And yeah, it's great to see people out there on the water. These are photos from events that we've held. We've brought people out, we've had drum circles, we've had dancing opportunities, just trying to give people a fun sense of the site and the possibilities of what can happen there. And it's been a wonderful experience. I don't know. I think it's been empowering for some. It's not like all of us have solutions or know all the answers around climate resilience, but we're resilient communities who want to engage in these projects. So yes, this is another, this was last year actually. This woman is a Brazilian, I think, woman who came in and did some dancing and got communities up and engaging. So I guess the last thing I want to say is, whether or not the the success of this Malden River Works project, I think will be evaluated over time. In the short term, it's about the physical implementation of the project, in other words, the park, but we're also concerned about the long term and the ability of this project to be replicated. The project's governance structure, the model, both and approach to climate adaptation without displacement is what we're about. And we think there's already evidence of other communities adopting similar structures. The city of Malden has already applied the steering committee model to new planning initiatives in the city. We've had lots of help and we're very grateful for that help. And I thank you for this opportunity to share that. So how do I get out of this?
Thank you. Thank you, Marcia. I think everyone is loving the story that you share, the project. One thing, my takeaway is it takes time. So thank you for your leadership, for your patience, for bringing the community together. So this is something that we can all learn and bring back to our community. And for me as a planner too, you know, to really appreciate the power and the voice of the community to drive the process, to lead the process. All right.
Thank you.
We'll hold the questions a little bit until after Hillary's stories too, and then we'll open up to have you have questions and comments to share with Marcia and Hillary. So with that, up next is Hillary. Would love to hear from you about, from the municipal side, how are you bringing the project and you know, the engagement work from your end?
Thanks, Van. And thank you, Marcia, for your presentation. I really appreciated what you said about trust, because I think a lot of times coming from the DPW side, we're thinking like, we're working very hard on this project. We have it all together. We're a group of competent professionals. Why doesn't the public trust us? And sometimes the answer really is because like, we're not working on it. We're not working on that relationship. So I really appreciate that perspective from your side. So what I am talking about today with you all is kind of how we get from an idea about green infrastructure, a desire to construct it, to having the project in the ground. And then I have a little bit about kind of our public outreach efforts at the end if we have time. But mostly I kind of want to talk about that project timeline and kind of get us all on a level in terms of like, how do we go from I want to build a project to I built the project. And on that opening slide here, I have a little guy in the corner who's saying, hey, look over here, because there's actually a rain garden over there. It's hard to see from this aerial picture, but the green infrastructure is everywhere. And so I wanted to flag that you can even see it just in this picture. Really quickly, I'll introduce myself. I'm the stormwater manager for the town of Braintree. I'm also the vice chair of the Massachusetts statewide Stormwater Coalition. We work on any issue about stormwater or regulatory framework about stormwater that will be interesting to every community in Massachusetts. We're mostly a group of municipal representatives. And before I was in Braintree, I worked for the town of Milton. So I heard there are a couple of Milton people here. Hi. Before that, I was at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and I studied environmental analysis and policy at BU before that. If you scan that QR code, I believe it takes you to Braintree's link tree. And so you can click on a whole bunch of other stuff that we're working on if you scan the code and go there. So very quickly again about Braintree, 40,000 people live in Braintree, just about. We have a mayor and a council form of government, so no town meeting. And this is a quick representation of the stormwater infrastructure that the division manages. So we have 4,000 catch basins, 345 outfalls, yada, yada, yada. You can read what's on the screen, but just kind of to get a picture of where we are, how big our system is, and what we manage. And before I move any further, we're kind of in the middle of a language shift in the stormwater community where we used to say best management practice. We now are starting to say stormwater control measure. Both of these phrases mean the same thing. It's a structure or strategy that it's going to improve stormwater quality, whether that's physical structure that infiltrates water or a strategic measure like street sweeping or cleaning a catch basin. So with all the disclaimers out of the way, we're going to the timeline. Well, not the timeline yet, first the map. So this year, Braintree installed 3 big stormwater control measures, one at Penman Park Elder Affairs, right by our senior center, one at Watson Park, and one at our town cemetery. So you can see these they're in different locations. We have little cutaway drawings of these. Hopefully I have time to talk more about those at the end, but this represents a very expensive effort and several years of planning. So I want to talk about how we got to having these structures in the ground already. Well, not already, by now. So here's the timeline, and Marcia's presentation had something similar where she had shown kind of how we get from concept to construction. And so I'm going to dive in a little deeper. The first thing we did was, after we said we want to do green infrastructure, we want to construct green infrastructure, we had to identify some sites. So how do we do that? We looked around for sites, that the town owned. That's number 1. If you can't work on the site, it's never getting done. Some other considerations we made were whether it was close to a water body, close to a river or stream, whether there was any potential to reduce flooding, whether there was space on the actual site, whether we could get grant funding to help us build the projects, and we did for all 3 of these projects, which is hugely important. Whether we could talk to the public about the projects. Some of these are like on residential streets or tucked away, not as exciting as something at the senior center, something at the biggest park in Braintree. So I hope that's kind of translating towards ease of communication with the public. And the last one I have there is addressing redevelopment. So for example, if we're building a new school or we're adding an addition to a school, could we respond to that redevelopment with additional stormwater infrastructure? In this case, that was the case with the cemetery. So that cemetery project addressed new development at the cemetery. We're making the cemetery bigger, so we also added stormwater controls. After you've kind of come up with your long list of sites, you need to evaluate those sites and get to a short list. So the way you can do that is there's many different considerations you need to make, but first of all, primarily is it literally physically possible? Can you infiltrate water there? Is groundwater low enough that you have room? And do you have other reasons that you might have a preference for those sites? So that's what I'm showing you on this slide, is we originally took our long list and then we scored it kind of holistically on, do we like this site? Can it remove a lot of pollution from the system? Does it have big positive impacts on a wetland? Does it have the visibility, the public education potential? And are we recommending it for site design? And that's how we get to a short list. And this is a great sort of matrix to dive into deeper if you ever want to talk to me about that. But I just wanted to show it so you could kind of get a taste of how we ended up picking the sites that we picked. After you have your short list, kind of the next thing to do is really dig in deep and go, okay, what do we want to put on a given site? That's conceptual design. And that's something that Marcia was also talking a lot about in terms of just kind of ideating, thinking about what you want to see at a given site, how you want it to look, how it even might be shaped is part of that process. So here's one of our conceptual designs. This is the project that was at Elder Affairs. You can see from the aerial photo, hopefully, that there was a large t-ball field that was not in use anymore. DPW had been asked by the Department of Elder Affairs to think about adding parking to the Council on Aging. There's a lot of parking kind of on the right-hand side of your screen. That's at the top of a hill. We were asked to add some more parking on the left-hand side of the screen at the bottom of the hill. Because if you go to the Braintree Council on Aging on a day ending in Y at about 11 a.m., you are going to be hard-pressed to find a parking space. And if the Elvis impersonator is there, forget about it. So they really needed some parking. And at that time, we said, if we're going to add parking, we should definitely add some stormwater controls there as well. And that's how we came up with this conceptual design. And you can see there's a lot of detail to it. There's potential plants, there's potential elevations for structures, things like that we start to think about. After we after we come up with a couple of ideas, and this was part of the Malden process as well, is we bring in the public and we say, okay, what do you guys think? Do you like this? What would you change, etc. So in Braintree, actually what happened was this area that we proposed to pave, we had the capital allocation and we had the project management availability. So we went ahead and we paved this whole area. And it turned out that the public did not love that. It ended up being clear from a lot of community meetings that we paved too much. And we had to spend a lot of time talking about that with members of the public. This is a flyer for a meeting that we had. We showed them a new concept design down here where we were going to remove some of that pavement. We're going to add that stormwater control structure down at the bottom. And that was kind of our, our public process that this is what we were going back to about trust. This is why folks were not happy. They felt like we didn't involve them early enough in the process. And we didn't, we spent money on pavement that we then dug up. So that was a learning experience for everybody, and definitely in terms of going forward, kind of a hopeful change in the way we're going to operate public engagement. And we noticed everybody in the neighborhood, everybody within, I would say 500 feet bigger, everyone within a big radius of the Council on Aging got this flyer and got invited over. And we had a meeting with about 60 people where they all told us, here's what we'd like to see. We'd love to see more park. We'd love to see these kind of plants in the basin, all that kind of stuff. And that, I think that was part of our process of rebuilding that kind of community investment and understanding and trust in the DPW and what we were up to over there. So once we get everybody back on board, once we have a really good design ready to go, the next important part in our construction process particularly was permits. That's in part because when you're constructing a project that is going to improve the quality of a water body, the best project is going to be really close to a water body, which means that in Massachusetts, you are going to have obligations to the State Wetlands Protection Act. So in our case, I'm going to show you some of the designs really quick and show you how close to the water they were or were not. So this is the Elder Affairs project that we were just looking at the concepts for. You can see this red line is the sort of magic line in the Wetlands Protection Act world. That's the 100-foot wetlands buffer. You always want to stay out of that if you can. And that pink line is the 200-foot buffer. And depending on the work that you're doing in the 200-foot buffer, you may or may not need a permit. And we actually, after we looked at this version of the plan, we were able to move a little more of the work out of that buffer zone. And that made it a little bit easier for us to get through the wetlands permitting process for this particular project. In comparison, here's the cemetery project. And I know this is the first time you're seeing this plan, so bear with me here, but focus on that red line. That is, again, that 100-foot wetland area. So all of the work on this side of it is within that buffer zone. So we have to be really diligent about the work that we're doing, the construction, making sure it's keeping the integrity of the wetland. And in fact, what we did was effectively reconstruct the services that the wetland gives us in terms of stormwater management by constructing this basin. So all of these really tight lines are representing a downward slope into a basin and into a long swale. The last project was the Watson Park project. This is another one that's a little bit farther outside of the wetland zone. That pink line, again, is the 200-foot area. And then I also, for this picture, because I think this is another consideration that we're doing at the DPW that I think people should know about and be thinking about, is this green line here is an active sewer line in Braintree. So in a perfect world, we constructed this part of the project that's shaded in blue. In a perfect world, the most perfect version of this project, which was a subsurface infiltration system, would to exist between those lines, between the green and the pink, so that we're out of the buffer zone and we don't need we can avoid difficult permitting and not in active conflict with a sewer line. And so after we went through the permitting process, we were able to kind of improve the situation of those subsurface chambers to get them off the sewer line, but it did mean that our permitting was a little bit trickier. So those are the kind of considerations that we're making when we're thinking about how to construct a project. It's like, can we even fit it in there? So we got this far. We have ideas, we have plans. It's time for bid documents. And I'm really excited to hear that you're in that process right now, Marcia, for your park, because I will be super interested in hearing the results of your bid. I'm always curious about construction costs and how that ends up looking, especially when you have a very dynamic new project that's gonna really completely facelift the area. And here are some real numbers. These are from our Elder Affairs and our Watson Park projects. I'm not showing you the cemetery numbers because the bid numbers don't reflect the cost of the stormwater work. They reflect the cost of the cemetery work. And that's not what we're talking about. So to zero us in a little bit here, you can see the range on these projects is quite large. And these are two fundamentally there are different kinds of projects in that one constructs an above ground system that you can see and has plantings in it and is kind of generally considered to be green infrastructure. And the subsurface infiltration project is underground, you can't see it, and it's considered gray infrastructure. And kind of the thing that they hold in common is that the primary expense of both of these projects is excavation. And you can see it borne out in the actual project costs in the sense that these projects are of a comparable size, but in general, most of the money for the work is in the digging. It takes a long time to dig. And then effectively what you do with these stormwater structures is you excavate out, and then you replace about half of what's in the hole with better material that drains better. So you can really kind of see that. I know that $223,000 and $301,000 feels like $75,000 is a big difference, but in terms of scale of DPW projects, those are a very comparable scale. And yet you can see that sometimes bidders are going to charge way more for a project because of their own considerations, or they're going to charge less for a project. We have Dan Dell, who bid the Elder Affairs project and the Watson Park project. They were the low bidder on the Watson Park project, and they were the high bidder on the Elder Affairs project. So it really just has to do with the contractors that decide to bid it, the considerations they're making that we don't see, what might they have to subcontract out, for example, and kind of what the bulk of the work actually is. But for reference, Marcia, if either of these contractors bid your project, we would give either of them a great reference. They've been excellent. Where does the money come from? I'm going to go so quickly. In our case, mostly town funds. In Braintree, we have a stormwater utility. So we have a dedicated utility enterprise that we've been able to save up some money and use to pay for green infrastructure improvements. That's been very positive for us. But we recognize that not every community has that funding. It's just in our case where most of our project funding would come from. Other sources that are available for towns and cities is the general fund. That's the big pocket where all the money comes from. If you can convince your town meeting or your council that it's a priority, you can access the general fund. You can use CPC funds, community preservation funds. That involves kind of an application to the Community Preservation Committee if you have one. And you can use one-time capital. So that would be money that also comes out of the general fund, but instead of allocating that money annually, you would get a one-time capital allocation from whoever controls your budget and work from there. There's also other funds available. You can get a loan. Usually that's a state revolving fund loan. That obviously turns into debt service. You have to keep paying money on that loan over time, but it's a way to defer some of the expenses of your project. A grant, on the other hand, is free money. So if you can get it, it's always the best kind. And there are some state funds. These are kind of the same bubble as the other bubble, but I wanted to include again that sometimes you can get money from the state, and that's great. And you can feel like you're doubling your money since you're using taxpayer dollars again. But There are also great agencies like MAPC that provide grants that are, it's not state funding, it's from a separate pocket, so to speak. So lots of different places and pockets to consider. So that's where you get to all before you even have a shovel in the ground. When you get the shovel in the ground, most of the work is done, hopefully. Then you actually build it. So here's a construction photo of our project at Elder Affairs. You can see this is right after they started excavating. So you just have this little hole over here and not much else yet. But we actually used a system called a chronolog. So where we are looking right now in this picture, the phone that took the photo is set on a 3D printed bracket. And we email those photos to Chronolog, which is the company, and their system creates a time lapse of photos. So there's a time lapse of photos all from the same angle, all with the same frame that show the progress of the project. And I'll put a link to that in the chat when I'm done. But I think that's a really cool tool to use if you can. It is a great way to invite the public to communicate with the project as well. We had ours inside the construction fence for reasons of framing the photo well, but if you can get it outside the construction fence, it's a fabulous thing. It's only like $200 a year. Short money for, I think, a lot of payoff. Here's a different picture from that same angle. So yeah, I put in a couple. You can see as we're starting to fill in the excavation, then they're putting in that last couple of layers. I love this one. This is Mike from our contractor. He's hydro seeding the grass here. That's hydro seed coming at you. And this is the day they were getting the plantings ready to go in. They're arranging each pot of plant before they actually start digging. This is after the plants went in. And you can see in the back here, that's a little spillway for if the system were ever to overflow. And that's kind of how it looks on the construction end. That part, didn't that part feel easy compared to the rest? I hope. And I think I do have a couple minutes, Van. Shake your head no if I don't. But thank you. But I want to talk about public outreach very quickly while we have everybody. We spent a lot of time talking about this project in a lot of different places, and indeed all three infrastructure projects, but I showed you some pictures from the senior center particularly. And we tried every different medium that we could. So we did social media, we did the chronolog, we had in-person meetings at the senior center, we had Zoom meetings about the conceptual designs, we were at the Conservation Commission in person. We created some posters that were up at the library for a little while, additional posters that were up at the Council on Aging. And finally, at the end of construction, we designed interpretive signage for those projects, and we created some public outreach videos. And those go together in the sense that both the signage and the videos were prepared to be bilingual. So if you go and watch one of our videos, you can watch it in English or you can watch it in Mandarin, which is the second most spoken language at home in Braintree, besides English. And if you look at our signage, which I have one of right here, we had a cutaway drawing prepared by an artist, and we prepared the sign. So basically what happened was I wrote the copy on the left and shipped it off to a translator who was able to translate it. I was able to bring it back into our design and load it in on the right. We're very fortunate in Braintree to have an employee at the Council on Aging who is an Asian community outreach coordinator. So she reviewed the sign kind of for the translation as an editor. And that's how we got to where we are. So I'm super proud of this artwork. I'm really excited about it. We had found an artist on Twitter who did this kind of cutaway drawing. I sent him a DM. I was like, he kind of does these like pseudo fake governmental versions of this. And I said, would you be interested in doing some work for a government agency actually? And he was like, yeah, I would. And it turned out his background was in architecture, so he was like rock and roll, ready to go on taking our plans and turning them into some of these really beautiful images. So that's what you see if you go visit the site. And if you are standing at the site, let me see if I can get us to Google Earth here really quick. Come on, Google Earth. There we go. So if you're in Google Earth, you're looking at the Council on Aging, you're standing about right here. All of this pavement is gone because
Hillary, it's still on the presentation. We're
Oh.
not seeing Google Earth.
that's because I shared just the program. Here we go. So here we are on Google Earth. Sorry about that.
There you go.
So you can see this pavement, that's all gone, as we had discussed, and the bioretention cell is right about here. And if you're standing, you can't see the back of the walkway here, but if you're standing about here on the walkway, you are seeing that sign that I just showed you, and I'll take us back there so you can see that again. But what we were going for was kind of for you to stand in front of the sign and feel like you were directly situated and looking at what you were directly situated at. And there's a sign like that at Watson Park as well. And the cemetery is still under construction, but that one will go in when it's finished. And we were able to do, particularly the video outreach we just kind of finished posting all 3 of those, but it's been huge. We've gotten a ton of new social media engagement from people we've never seen or heard from before. And that was funded by MAPC, so shout out MAPC. But I'm gonna stop myself there, and we can Q&A, we can chit chat, let's talk. This is my contact information everywhere. Thanks everybody for having me.
Thanks, Hillary. Thanks again, Marcia and Hillary, for sharing. So I will open up for questions. Anything that you would like to ask either Marcia or Hillary, or anything that you're curious about, or any takeaway, anything inspiring you learned today?
Can I say something?
First.
Great. Hillary, it was very encouraging to hear that you say that you learned through the process of the need to have community engagement at an earlier stage in the planning. And I think that's a wonderful lesson. It's great that people were vocal and said, this is great, you did this wonderful parking lot, but it's not what we want. So I appreciate that you were able to hear what people were saying and make changes appropriately. So that's great. I think it's a wonderful lesson learned.
Thanks.
Any initial reactions or thoughts of the stories we heard today? Ian, I saw you come off mute.
Yeah, I thought they're both great stories. And Marcia, I was really curious how your project got started, right? Like, you clearly for a long time now, you've had this really robust kind of community engagement process and a really well thought out, governance structure. But like, how did that all get off the ground in the first place?
Well, there's an organization called Friends of the Malden River who've been functioning for about 15, maybe more, closer to 20 years. And, they've been working on all kinds of cleanups on the river and and one of the members of that Friends of the Malden River worked at MIT and knew that the Leventhal Center for Urban Development was going to initiate this city prize, and brought that information to Malden. And we applied for that. That's basically, we applied for that. There was this international contest, and basically you were submitting a proposal that addressed resilience and equity, and we ended up winning. I mean, we had to go through a whole process of going to MIT and presenting. And the day we presented, we took the mayor with us, which in a way showed that the city was involved in this, was willing to be involved, and thought this was a great project. And we ended up winning the 100,000, which allowed us to jumpstart the project. Once we had won that 100,000, for one thing, I think at that time there was only about 6 of us who were on this, and we were able to establish the kind of structure we wanted to see. We were saying, this is the kind of governance structure, and these are the people we want to see sitting on this structure. That there was Malden's a very diverse community. We wanted to be sure that that diversity was represented in this steering committee, and that winning that prize allowed us to do that. And we began with that money. We held our first community meeting to say, this is what we want to do. We want to bring a public park to the Malden River, and we need all of your input to make this happen. And that's how I remember that first meeting, we had brought a kayak, and put it in the senior center in the room where we're holding it, and put some, invasive species in there, and just always to connect with communities to say, people didn't even know there was a river. And we're saying, yes, there is, and we want access where there wasn't, because along the river, it was private owned lots, and so people couldn't access publicly. In Malden, if you wanted to get on the Malden River, you have to go to Everett, or you have to go to Medford or somewhere else. You can't access it through Malden. So we're going to change that, and people were extremely excited to hear about that. Yeah, sorry.
Great. Since we have a small group, Karen, is it okay